Hello, my name is Jay Mcfarland, and I want to welcome you to Preferred Professionals of America, where we shine a bright light on top professionals from around our nation. Today's guest is Patricia Daly-Lipe. She is an award-winning author and artist. She gives presentations about writing, and she really is an inspiration. You're going to love hearing about how she became an author and what inspires her, and I think you'll be inspired along the way. All right, Patricia, it's such a pleasure to have you on the show today. I always like to start out with what you wanted to be when you grow up compared to what you ended up doing. Did you think that you were going to have a writing career from early on?
I started actually writing in seventh grade, being publishing in my school newspaper. That was my first quote job. And in seventh grade, let's see, I was what, 12? And that was the beginning. Before that, basically, I painted. Writing wasn't the number one. Painting was something I did ever since I was a little kid. And my father painted, so I guess that rubbed off on me. And I lived across the street from the Pacific Ocean in La Jolla. And this older lady used to take the kids, and we'd all sit on a rock watching the waves splash. And then we'd take our watercolors and try to paint what we saw. And that was the beginning of my painting. And then the painting immersed into writing. And then one thing led to another. My first real job was when I came back from Europe, and I was given a job to write for the Evening Star newspaper in Washington, D.C. I was supposed to answer the phone, and the reporter would be in some horrific situation. You know, you'd have some dreadful something going on, and he or she would be speaking so quickly. I kept having to say, "Can you repeat that?" Now, the reason was, it's not that they weren't speaking English, and I speak English. I had been speaking Italian and French for 2.5 years. And I came back to the United States, and the English they were speaking was with a Southern accent. I could not understand them. Well, you don't want to have somebody answering the phone and then say, "Can you repeat?" when you've got a disaster behind them. So they put me in a different area. Where do you think they put me?
Covering art and writing, things like that?
Obituaries.
Oh, I would have never guessed.
That was my first real job. And I met people that I never would have met before. People in those days, it was Washington, D.C. was segregated. And some of the people that I met were in a neighborhood that I'd never been to before. And I got to know them and write about their loved one who had passed. And that was the beginning of my making connections with individuals and seeing how important it is to learn about experiences people have had in different parts of their life. And that's really leads to my philosophy, which is history is biography.
Yeah, when did you decide that you were going to turn that into writing actual books and specifically focus on historical fiction?
Well, for years I wrote for magazines and papers. And for 2 years, I taught a course in Annapolis called Myth, Magic, and Metaphor. That was what I called it. And it was a journey into the heart of creativity. And it became the book,
Oh, I love it.
which has my other painting on the cover. And Myth, Magic, and Metaphor was some of my quote students of Myth, Magic, and Metaphor in Annapolis were actually professors at the Naval Academy. And the first thing that I say to them was, what I said to them was, there are no rules. The Naval Academy, no rules. What? you know. But one of the professors stuck with me for 4 courses. Actually, he did a really wonderful job. The idea is to listen to your heart and speak what you feel, and allow the words to flow. Give yourself permission. So that's what the book is meant to do. When I came to La Jolla, I moved from Washington, D.C. back to La Jolla, where I grew up. And Richard Lederer was acquainted with my course in Myth, Magic, and Metaphor. And he said, "Patricia, you have to write a book about that." So that was my first book. And that was, in 1999. And, he said, make it into a book so that people can be inspired all over. They can get your book and be inspired. Well, yes, in the book, I do have assignments at the end. If you want to have an assignment and do some homework, you can read the book. You don't have to, but if you want to, there's always something at the end of the chapter to inspire you to do some writing. And it talks about the etymology of words, among other things, which is sort of interesting. Like reveal means to remove the veil, revelare. So you can visualize reveal and you can see the veil being moved away so you can see. And there was an opera in San Francisco one year that I went to, and I guess it's Die Frauenschatten. And she's singing with the veils separating the audience from the screen. And little by little, as the opera progresses, one veil after another is pulled up until the audience is right there with the singer on the stage. The veils have been removed. There you are, the word reveal.
I'm curious, with all of your books, what do you hope to achieve? I'm sure it's something different with each book, but what is your overall goal that you want people to get out of reading your works?
I want people to I want them to be inspired in one way or another. And the main inspiration I want is for people to consider writing down themselves what they've seen, what they feel. Learn to listen to what you're feeling. Go out and smell and see and feel and look. People today, you go to a restaurant, you see these kids with their cell phone in front of them. Instead of talking to their parents, they're sitting there looking at something or playing a game. Or you see people taking a walk and they're looking at a cell phone or they're listening to something. Don't go out and let nature speak to you. You're part of it. Enjoy what we have, the smell, the taste, the feel of nature, and let it speak to you. And then just inhale and then when you exhale, get in front of your computer and let your hands work on the keys and let the words take over. And you'll be surprised at what comes out. You never know. And you don't have to have somebody there saying, oh, you should, or you could, or this, or that. Let the words flow. Later on, go back, and sometimes you'll be surprised. Oh, did I write that? Wow. But you have to believe in yourself and go out and enjoy where we are in the world. Enjoy the nature that's around us.
Boy, I love that. I think a big issue and what's hard for me and for other people is we second guess ourselves. And you're talking about getting past that, right? Just
Yes,
start.
just do it. Everybody has something different. Something I wrote was authors see things differently. Dialogue and facts are not finding things, but evaluating what they find, seeping into the culture of the times. We're all different, and thus we all have a different perspective. That's what one of the things I wrote in the book. And we do. And we have to just love ourselves and respect what we see and feel, and it's okay. And you're different from me. I'm different from the next one. My husband, my children. We're all individuals. That's the beauty of being a human being. You are an individual. What can you share? What can you do to make it a better place? I'm not talking about writing something down because you don't like it. I'm talking about writing something down because you do like it and you want to share it and you want other people to feel something good as a reaction to what you're reading. And sometimes, like my books, a lot of them are historic fiction. The fiction part is because I'm not sure about all the facts, but the historic part is a lot of research. Most of them are totally historical, like Miami's Yesteryears, this one. And Miami's Yesteryears is my newest one. I guess it won't be until the spring that the publisher will have it ready. But this one is the latest one that's been published. And it took a lot of research because it's based on what I found out about my grandfather on my father's side. And I never met him. And he was one of the, quote, founders of Miami. So what I did is I researched how Florida became a state because I'm a native Californian. So I had to research that. It wasn't something that was taught to me in school. I didn't live here, but my father did and my grandfather did. And so I had to do a lot of research. I read 6 books, did a lot of checking on facts and figures to find out the evolution and development of the state of Miami, and then the evolution of a place called Miami. And what's amazing is that it was a woman who allowed Miami to become a city. Yay! Julia Tuttle did it. But that's another story that I could tell. But anyway, that's in the book. What did Julia Tuttle do? How did she do it? And then what happened? And eventually, you'll find out how Miami was developing. And then my grandfather, whose name was Locke Tiffin Heileman, he ended up going down on a business trip to Miami in 1904, and he saw a potential. And so in 1911, he ended up taking his family from St. Louis, Missouri, down to Miami, and they moved there. And he dredged and created Palm Island, Hibiscus Island, Point View. People thought he was crazy. He'd take them out in a boat and he'd point to the water and he'd say, "This is where you're going to live." What? In the water? But he created those islands, and then as people ended up buying the property and building these mega mansions, and it became Millionaire's Row. Unfortunately, it's not there anymore, but in those days, these beautiful homes. And people stopped laughing at him. He worked with Flagler on Tamiami Trail. He worked with others developing different parts of Miami. All of this I didn't know, but I felt that someone had said, "You need to write about your grandfather because nobody seems to know about him." So that's what started me on it. And then I have a Florida publisher who said they'd like to publish it, and it's won 2 awards so far.
That's amazing. I love that you've gone back and gotten to know your grandfather and that you're telling that story. I'm curious, with historical fiction, are you hoping that people learn the history along the way? Because you're telling stories. Is your goal that they gain appreciation for history? Because I feel like that's something we're losing right now, is an appreciation for the past and those that came
Remember the
before.
expression. The expression is, if you can't learn from the past, you're bound to repeat it. And we aren't learning from the past. People are not learning. They're not learning in school. They're not learning in college. They're not learning from the politicians. Not all of them. The ones I like, you'll learn from. Well, I guess we won't get into politics. But anyway, it needs to be taught so that we can learn something and realize, what needs to be done. Education is the key, and that's what's lacking in this country right now. We're not an educated country anymore.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, and I love that you've made that one of your goals, and that you are obviously a storyteller. I'm curious, how long does it take for our listeners who may be considering going down this path of writing? How much time do you put into one of your books?
When I'm doing the book, my husband has to say, "Hey, it's time to feed the horses." Oh, okay. Take time out. Whoops. I get totally involved and then time just disappears. I'm totally immersed in it. And he puts up with it. Actually, my husband's a retired physician, so he's very good at being an editor. I'm in the creativity and he's into he's 1, 2, 3 and this and that. And I'm into whatever it feels like. But historical is what most of my books are, but historical fiction is one book, which is called A Cruel Calm, Paris Between the Wars. And it's a reason it's fiction is it's based on what my mother's life was like before I was born. And she died when I was only 18, so she did not tell me. And so I found out later, and I speak French, so I went to live in Europe and I interviewed people and did a tremendous amount of research. And the fiction is that I'm not positive, but I think I got it right. And she lived in Paris between World War I and World War II. As they say, entre les deux guerres, between the 2 wars. And I did a lot of research about what was it like living in Paris between World War I and World War II. It was like Paris in those days was the cultural capital of the world. I mean, you had E. E. Cummings with the little e, little c, and I explained in the book why they're little. And you had James Joyce, who actually rented the apartment above my mother's on the Ile Saint Louis. So I had to read all of James Joyce so he could speak to the protagonist, aka my mother, in his own words. And I mean, it was an amazing period of time. And so I integrated all of that into the book and telling her story.
Well, I can't wait to read it. I am a huge fan of history, and one of the
Good.
things that I lament is that a lot of these stories aren't being told. We're losing the generation that
Mhm.
fought in World War II, and a lot of them when they came home, and I think a lot of people who have been in wars, they don't come home and tell their stories, and then when they're gone, those stories could be lost forever.
What I would like people who have been in the war and who have fought, what I would like them to know is writing is therapy. So if you'll have it inside of you unless you let it and release it. You don't have to show it to anybody. But if you write it down, you're going to feel better. And hopefully at some point you'll want to share it with your family or with your friends or with the world. It's up to you. But if you just write it, I guarantee you're going to feel better. I've had some of my quote students who are older people who realized when they started allowing some of these expressions to find their place in the computer, on their website, or on their, not on their website, but on their Word document, they just feel better. It's there. And then all of a sudden they realize things about themselves that they had forgotten. And they realized, oh, that's something actually I should share because I had forgotten about that. Well, let go, let it flow.
Boy, it's such great advice. A lot of people are always thinking about the outcomes of writing, and you're saying forget about the outcome. Just get it on
Yeah,
paper and
just
it
do
could
it.
change you. Yeah.
You have Rilke, who is a wonderful poet. He said, the world is large, but in us it's as deep as the sea. And George O'Keeffe, who said, to see takes time. And that's why I want people to just enjoy being who they are. Whatever they're doing with their life, enjoy it. If you don't enjoy it, find something else to do. Go out there, even if it means just getting out and taking a walk. Sometimes that's the best therapy right there. Just take the walk when it's cool. In Florida right now, you don't want to take a walk right now. It's too hot and sticky. But, when it's nice and you can enjoy it, enjoy the sunset. Go down to the ocean. If you're in California, which I loved, you get the green flash. That's when the sun goes down. And just when it drops off the horizon, you have what's called a green flash. Many people don't even know what a green flash is because they've never spent time watching the sun set on the ocean in California. It's beautiful. Or in the East Coast, of course, you see the sunset, but it's not over the ocean. But you can still see the bright, beautiful lights. We have all of these God given beauties right around us. We just need to open our eyes and enjoy them or listen to them and then share them.
It's inspiring what you talk about. I've been there. I've sat on Laguna Beach and watched the sun go down, and you're exactly right. It's something that you have to experience. You can't sum it up with a video or anything else. You just got to do it.
No, it's like when I told you when I was a little girl and we sat on the rocks and this older lady was teaching us how to use watercolors and we're watching the surf. You don't even have to watch the sunset. You can just sit on the rocks and listen to the surf. That's soothing in itself. But then watch, the beautiful white that just flows up into the air and throws itself onto the rocks. And then all these cute little animals that are crawling around on the rocks, all these little, mini, whatever they're called, these little guys, roaming around in pools of water on the rocks. And I mean, all of that can be so enjoyable. Or just, I don't know, there was some plant that had this root system that went over the side of the cliff, which was a rock across the street from our house. And my mother and father, they never knew that I hung on that root system and hung off the side of the cliff, and it was down below were more rocks and then the ocean, and I didn't know it was something scary. I enjoyed it. They had no idea that I was doing stuff like that, but I was just enjoying nature. That's what we did. We had time as kids. We could roam around the neighborhood and the parents weren't upset and worried. We didn't have cell phones. And, when it got to be time to come home, we knew we needed to be home. So we went home.
You're not just an author, you also give presentations. What is the goal
Yes.
of those presentations? What do you cover and what do you hope the outcome will be?
I think my main goal in most of them is creativity. It can be in three different categories. It can be writing, creative writing. It could be in painting, which I do, as you can see. The point is that it's within. It's within. So be it music, writing, or art, creativity is inside of you, and you have to give yourself permission to let it express itself. And the etymology, here's another etymology. The etymology of the word courage is care, which is French for heart. So it takes courage to listen to your heart.
Can I ask what other hobbies you have? I mean, you paint, you write. What else
I
do you like
rescue
to do?
thoroughbreds.
You
I
rescue
rescue thoroughbreds.
thoroughbreds?
I used to show them and race them. In California, I had a thoroughbred and I thought, well, I'll breed her. And somebody said, well, what are you going to do with the foal? And I said, I'm going to have a racehorse. And they all laughed at me because at that point I was a single parent with three little kids. And they said, you're going to do what? And I said, well, let's see what happens. So I took my thoroughbred, whose name was Cloudy, and I interviewed, quote, interviewed stallions up and down the state of California. And I had a thing for a stallion named Patron. He would play with me. He would be in the back of his stall, and I would go up and say, hello, and through the bars, and he ran up and, and I ran back. And then he'd go to the back of the stall again. And so I go back to the front of the stall and he would come up and scare me again. And we played this game and I just fell in love with Patron. So I had permission to breed my mare to Patron. So we called the foal Patty Patron. And Patty Patron ended up winning her first race when she raced at Santa Anita. She won at Hollywood Park and she won at Del Mar. People stopped laughing at me. They were making bets and making money. And then her son, when I bred her years later, her son was Risky Ronnie. And I think you can figure out where I got that name. He was born in San Ynez Valley and there was somebody who lived in the top of the hill. You know who I mean, right?
Are you talking about Ronald Reagan?
Yes. So my foal, Risky Ronnie, ended up, he didn't race until he was 4 years old. And everybody said, why'd you wait so long? Well, first of all, this is the only country in the world that races 2-year-olds. They're not ready. My horses didn't race as 2-year-olds. Patty Patron raced as a 3-year-old and won. But Risky Ronnie didn't race until he was 4 because he was immature. He was physically ready, but emotionally he was immature, and I didn't want him to go to the racetrack and get hurt. I wanted him to do what he had to do, or what he needed to do, or what he wanted to do, or what he could do. And he sure did. His first race, he won. But that was before I found out what people were doing to their horses to get them to run. My horses ran because they could and because they wanted to. But when I found out what some people were doing to their horses to make it possible for them to run, I said, I'm out of it. And I told my trainer, Eddie Gregson, I said, Eddie, no more. So ever since then, I've been rescuing thoroughbreds. We've actually rescued 12. And when we moved to Florida, we had moved from California to Virginia. We were there for 13 years. Then we moved down here to Florida 4 years ago. 2 of my horses said, you're not finding a home for us. If you're moving to Florida, you're taking us with you. Okay, so we had to find a house with a barn. And that's why we have the horses here with us. Well, one of my books is a horse the horses wrote. And I had to translate what they told me.
Mm.
It's giving talking about where they were before they came to live with, quote, the lady, and to give people insight to understand what these horses might be subjected to. I mean, these are rescues, and there's a reason we rescued them. My dogs are rescues. They have stories to tell too. Some of my dog stories were published in magazines, and I put some of them in my book called Nature's Wisdom. And animals have stories to tell too. So if you don't want to tell your own story, start out by telling the story of an animal that you have.
That's amazing. I'm curious. What's next? What's on the list? I get the feeling you're never going to stop. Never going to stop
No.
expanding. Or what's next on the list?
Well, I was recently asked to do a portrait of somebody's dog that she won, so I did. So, I answered her request. People asked me to do things, and that's how these things happen. I was asked to put together a book about my late mother-in-law. She was, quote, the living legend of La Jolla when she was alive, and she and I just really got to know each other quite well because of her painting skills. She started out as a medical illustrator, and then she became a watercolorist. So from one extreme where you put everything in to the other extreme, which is what you leave out is just as important as what you put in, namely watercolors, she did it. She was amazing. She went all over the world doing drawings and paintings of what she saw. She went places that people can't go anymore. She went through the Cyber Pass with 2 women, 3 women alone going through the pass. I mean, you can't do that anymore. She went to China, places where you can't go anymore. She did paintings and drawings of all those places. So yes, that was my latest venture, is put together her story and then put together her paintings and her drawings and show how she went from a drawing to a painting, from everything to what's left out, so to speak. And she was an incredible lady. So that's the book that's with Durance Publishers, and they said they'll have it ready in the spring.
Oh, I love it.
So that
I
was
love
the
it.
latest. So who knows who's going to ask me to do what next? I'm open.
I love that. I love that. I know you've won a lot of awards over the years. Is there one award that stands out to you that you're most proud of?
I'm surprised by getting awards. I mean, I really appreciate it when it's about a book, and I've received quite a few for my books. But when it's about me, it's embarrassing. It's surprising. I guess I appreciate it, but I'm having to live up to something. I hope I can. I mean, the International Organization of Top Professionals has given me 2 awards, one for the author of the decade, can you believe, which is something hard to live up to. Um, I just appreciate, if you appreciate what I've written, that's what's really important to me. And when I have this book about Miami's yesteryears, I called it yesteryears because my father wrote a poem about, quote, yesteryears, being the old times in Miami. When I won the first award, I was thrilled. And now I've won 2 awards for that book. That means more to me, with all due respect to IAOTP and Preferred Professionals. I've received awards from both of them, and I'm very, very proud of that. But I really would like to emphasize going to my website, literarylady.com. That's what somebody called me, a literary lady. So we call my website literarylady.com, and look at my books. And if you order from me, you get a discount.
That's great. So literarylady.com. Can I ask, do you have a favorite work? Do you have a favorite book, or are they all of equal meaning to you?
I think Myth, Magic, and Metaphor has done more for me than any of the other books. I've written 2 La Jolla books. The first book was because I was asked to do it for a newspaper, and then a publisher, Sunbelt Publication, came to me and said, "Can you make a book out of the articles you've been writing for the newspaper about the history of La Jolla?" And that's how that book came to be. So I'm very happy with that book. But then another publisher, Arcadia Books, came to me and said, "We like the book you wrote on La Jolla. Can you write another one?" And I said, "Yes, I have plenty of stories." So I added more stories to the second book called Historic Tales of La Jolla. And so I'm very pleased to say that I'm going to La Jolla for a book signing at Warwick's Bookstore and a presentation in La Jolla in the last week of September because of those books. So I'm very proud of those. But the one that's done the most is probably Myth, Magic, and Metaphor, inspiring people to write. And that's usually when I give a talk, unless they want to know, like, for example, I wrote the story about my great uncle William, who served the troops in World War I. Now, when I met great uncle William, he was the first American canon of St. Peter's, but he didn't live in the Vatican. He lived in Rome in an apartment in the Palazzo Doria because the Principessa Doria Pamphini gave him this apartment to live in. And there's a whole story behind that apartment, who lived there before, and the fact that my great uncle ended up being there in that apartment. It's a very interesting story. I won't give it away. But when I met him, he was a jovial man, got along with everybody. We had lunch. Can you believe one day I was invited to join him? He had the King and Queen of Denmark for lunch. I went to Elizabeth Arden, got my face done, went home, looked in the mirror, washed my face. I said, "That's not me." Then I practiced doing a curtsy because I thought that's what I needed to do. And then when I got to my great uncle's apartment, I was told that the King and Queen were with my great uncle in the library. So I went into the library ready to do my curtsy, and the Queen put her hand out to shake hands. They were just like a couple who'd walked off Fifth Avenue in New York City. And lunch was I was terrified.
Well, listen, I could listen. I wish we had more time. I could listen to your stories, and you're an inspiration. I love your passion. I think that it's clear to me that you have changed many lives, and I think people listening to this will be inspired as well.
That's the idea. Thank you.
Once again, I want to thank Patricia Daly-Lipe for joining us today. I just love her passion. I love her desire to help inspire people. She inspired me. I actually decided I'm going to go out and start some projects that I was questioning myself. So I really enjoyed her interview, and I hope you did too. My name is Jay Mcfarland, and join me next time on Preferred Professionals of America.